This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Scott German. We're going to talk some UVA and ACC sports. And let's see. Let's start with basketball. As expected, Scott, Virginia ranked number one in the AP poll. Second straight week. We wait 35 years to get ranked number one. Now we're back-to-back weeks. And actually, Virginia's numbers in the first place votes grew this week. Last week it was 30 votes. This week 42. So Virginia will host Georgia Tech on Wednesday night in Charlottesville, and Cav fans and people like Scott and I get to see a number one team with our own very eyes in Charlottesville for the first time in many, many years. Something to look forward to, Scott.
Oh, absolutely. And the good thing about it is once we got past Miami last Tuesday night, we had a whole 8 days to enjoy it. Didn't have to do any worrying about anything. Just had to sit back and let everybody else beat up on each other, and actually strengthened the hold somewhat on first place. So it was a good week.
Yeah, that's a good point. With the way the ACC went this week, Virginia is sitting there at 13-1, having the rest of the week off after last Tuesday. It's really interesting to see. Scott and I have been doing our ACC power poll the last few weeks. We both put North Carolina number 2, even though they're third in the standings. Duke won the game with Clemson yesterday to improve to 10-4. Carolina's 10-5, but Carolina's on a 5-game winning streak in the ACC. Of course, they own a win over Duke in that head-to-head in Chapel Hill. They still have one more to go in Durham, the rematch of that coming up in a couple weeks here. But it's sort of a divide and conquer to a point where Virginia's still, here with 2 weeks left to go in the season, the only team to clinch that double bye into Thursday. There's still a lot of movement possible between North Carolina and Duke and Clemson, and I guess, there's a step or two down to Louisville and Virginia Tech, but still a lot can happen between now and the end of the regular season. And, with Duke, Marvin Bagley III hasn't played for 3 straight games. They've had to do some things to shuffle around. Clemson's been without a couple of guys. So, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, maybe outside of Virginia and North Carolina right now. It's a lot of flux between those other teams.
Yeah, North Carolina's beginning to worry me just a little bit in the fact that they have seemed to right the ship. And 5 straight wins, among those wins were the wins against Duke. It didn't come in the Dean-Down, so let's see how they fare when they go to Durham. But, and it's one thing for sure, Carolina knows how to win. I mean, they are the defending national champions. So, I was not real, I was one of the folks that was writing Carolina off, a couple of weeks ago, even to the point of saying they may struggle to make the NCAA tournament. Well, now they're not on the bubble for that, certainly, and they're going to probably if they continue to play like they have, they could even, be in contention for, one or probably a 2 seed in the tournament.
Yeah, I would agree there. Interesting in the national polls this week, and the stock you put in national polls sometimes, Duke rose all the way to 5th. They won 2 games. They beat Virginia Tech and Clemson, a Clemson team without 2 starters. And Duke, because the name brand on the front of the uniform is Duke, they go from 12 to 5 based on that, which is really interesting. But Carolina is clearly right now the team of those 2 that has the upper hand. And of course, Duke has the home game, so we'll see how that plays out. Of course, there's still an ACC tournament to go. I was looking at the schedules for the top 4 teams right now. Well, not Virginia. We know Virginia's going to sail through the games with Georgia Tech and Pitt. They've got Louisville and Notre Dame to finish up. Virginia will win the ACC regular season this year. But then the battle for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, you look at Carolina. I don't think any of these are necessarily easy when you look at the stretch runs for these teams. Carolina is at Syracuse, then they're home against Miami, then at Duke. So those are 3 NCAA tournament teams. You look at Duke, they've got actually 4 games still left. Louisville, Syracuse, UNC, and then at Virginia Tech. Again, 4 NCAA tournament teams in that mix as far as where things stand right now. And then Clemson at 9-5, so they've fallen back. They lost 2 games last week. That loss to Florida State really hurt Clemson. that overtime loss, a game that they led big, and Florida State had to rally and win. Clemson finishes out at Virginia Tech, then Georgia Tech, and then they have Florida State and then Syracuse to finish out. So maybe of those three, Clemson has slightly easier schedule, but only right now a game separates those three teams. And then you go down to Louisville, Virginia Tech. They're both 8-6. They're the next sort of tier down. On paper, those two teams perhaps could jump up into the top four if they were to win out and one of those top teams were to stumble. But I think those are your top four. What do you think, Scott?
I think that's pretty solid. Once Clemson continues to spiral downward. Now, what we haven't talked about or hit on is the Bagley injury at Duke. And I was reading an article just actually earlier this afternoon. I'm not sure. I think it was in the USA Today, but not sure I agree with it or not. But do you think there's any? The speculation is, have we seen the last of Bagley this year?
I've thought.
Could serve him by coming back and playing. Now, he's done what he's needed to do, and if his knee injury is not anything more than, of course, Duke's playing it very close to death, but there's speculation that the Bagley camp may shut him down.
It would not surprise me, and I'm not saying I haven't seen anything from anyone who seems to know definitively the medical situation there, like what the extent of the injury is. But I was speculating this, just not knowing anything about that. We know he's a kid who's going to be probably the top pick in the draft in June when the NBA draft is held late in June, and so. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Kyrie Irving. Now, Kyrie Irving got hurt in his freshman year at Duke, his only year at Duke, early in the season, like 11 or 12 games into the season. Tried to come back for the NCAA tournament, was not the same, and they actually lost that first-round game that he played in. When you look at a kid like Bagley and say, you're the number one pick in the draft, if it's at all something that he'll need to really be careful with, if I don't know, and that's the part about the high draft stock that this kid has. Duke seems to have righted the ship a little bit. They've won a couple games. In fact they've won all three games since he got hurt. But yeah, he's a difference maker for them, and it would not surprise me, Scott, if we haven't seen the last of him. If there's any uncertainty about his knee. If I'm telling him anything, I'm telling him, dude, sit out. It's not worth it to play for free. You're going to get paid a lot of money to play. Don't be Nerlens Noel. Don't be some of these other guys. Don't be Joel Embiid. Go out there and get yourself healthy and play pro basketball next year and make a lot of money doing that.
And this article went on to kind of break it down, and the more I read it, the more it made sense. He's kind of gone out and showcased himself, and breaking down his play about his per game performance. One of the last games that still should be kind of like a highlight is he scored 30 points and grabbed 14 rebounds against the number one team in the country, which, by the way, is UVA. How do you really? What else do you really? And he had some other good games. They broke it down too. I think did they beat Michigan State or Michigan that they had earlier in the season, way early in the season. But in their marquee games, he performed extremely well. So he doesn't really need to prove anything anymore.
No, and at this stage, it's not about proving anything as far as his NBA draft stock anyway. He had a great game. The game he got injured in, actually, the North Carolina game, he played a great second half. Apparently what we're told afterwards was he got hurt in the first half of that game. He played all 20 minutes of the second half and had huge numbers in that game for Duke. So, at this stage, it's not about proving what he can do on the floor against college guys. Whatever happens with him in college, if he plays the rest of the season and they win the NCAA title, he's still going to have to go out there in May and June and perform in front of team executives. I doubt he'll go to any of the pre-draft showcases because he's going to be the top pick. But he's going to have to show, in a different setting, what he can do than the game setting. He's long since proven what he can do in a game setting, and honestly, you look at his game. He's a great ball handler. He can run the floor. He can distribute the ball. The only thing he can't do is really consistently hit down a mid-range and deeper jump shot. But the kid's 17 years old. He'll get that to his game as he gets older. But yeah, there's nothing he has to prove at this stage, and so. If that's why I say if there's any, and I think that's what the USA Today article you're referencing, Scott, had to say. If there's any question about the health of his knee, shut it down. And so that's something I had thought without even seeing any speculation in print. That's not a surprise to see that thrown out there.
No, I think earlier in one of our podcasts we talked about, and I think we had a disagreement. We kind of on opposite sides of these high draft picks like Bagley and whether or not I think we compared it to players in college football going on to play in bowl games. The trend was becoming a lot of top players were electing to forego some of the bowl games. But we know they're just exhibitions where the NCAA tournament certainly not that. But, again, he's not playing. He didn't come to Duke to win a national championship. I mean, let's just be. If they happen to win it while he was there, that's great. But his primary reason to come into Duke was to showcase himself, to develop it one more year, so the NBA had a one-year farm team in Duke. I think that there's a good possibility that he may be done. Now, we could be wrong. The other thing, too, Duke's playing it close to the vest. Krzyzewski, I compare him a little bit to Bill Belichick with the Patriots. You're not going to get a lot out of it. Why would he come out right now and say that Bagley, is not going to play? He could do that every game. And I think his latest comment was, when asked about the injury, he said he's getting closer. That sounds like a Belichick response.
Well, it does. And one thing it does too is it makes it hard for you to game plan. If you're an opposing coach, you have to almost create two game plans. I mean, you have to create two game plans because, Duke has I said righted the ship, since they lost Bagley for the last three games. You see Grayson Allen playing more point guard. That's kind of woken him up. He'd really gone through some doldrums where he was not playing well off the ball and not really doing much on the floor. And maybe maybe Duke had been relying so much on Bagley to create all the offense that as a result, the other guys weren't being utilized as much. You don't want to say they're a better team without the potential top draft pick, because I think Bagley, when he gets to the NBA, is going to be sort of a once-in-a-generational type player. I think he's going to be a guy that for the next 10, 12 years is an all-star. He'll be a first-team All-NBA guy eventually. So it's hard to say that you're better without him on the floor. But I think Duke has sort of had to adjust and play more of a team game. They're actually using their bench more now. So in a weird way, these last three games they've been a better team. And now, so even if he comes back, I think Scott, we saw this. I guess it was 3 seasons ago with three or four seasons ago when Justin Anderson got hurt. Now he was gone for 8 or 9 games, but when he came back late, he came back in the ACC tournament and then played a couple games in the NCAA tournament. It was never the same. The team had gotten used to playing without a star player, and then all of a sudden the star player's back there, and it throws off rotations. It throws off, what you're doing on the floor when you're out there. Bagley's only been gone 3 games, but if he's going to miss a few more games and then come back late, that hurts the team too. So, you have to weigh all that. I mentioned the Kyrie Irving example when he came back for Duke. Back in his one season at Duke a few years ago, that Duke team was a 2 seed, and I think that was the game they lost to Lehigh. You got to be careful about that kind of stuff. So Duke's playing well right now. If he's not going to come back, certainly before the end of the regular season, you have to really wonder then, even if he is eligible to come back or able to come back health-wise, if you want him back, because, by that point, when you get to the one-and-done part of your season, you lose one game and you're done. I don't know that you want a guy coming back and ruining your rotations and everything else in that kind of situation.
Oh, I agree. And if you recall back when Virginia played without Justin Anderson for about, I believe they were like 9-0, or they won
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And when again when Justin did come back, it kind of everybody had to, I don't think anybody wanted to admit it, but it kind of threw the team, the chemistry off. And if you think about it, with Bagley, it could be even more because let's not kid anyone. Duke's still got a lot of talent there, and they're learning to win without him, and playing probably a little more team ball, and then all of a sudden you bring him back. And this, just listening to myself, it sounds ridiculous to say, would they be better off without him? But I don't think that's as ridiculous of a rationalization as it sounds, because especially if 3 games turns into 5 or 6, and then you start getting into the ACC tournament where you play a little differently with your rotations and everything. I'm not totally convinced that the article was not right on, that we may have seen the last of him this season in his career.
That's right, because it's only 2 more weeks left in the regular season. The regular season finale's coming up that first Saturday in March. So yeah, we're right there as far as that goes, and so it will be intriguing to see how that plays out. Again, Duke finishes up. They have 4 games still left on their schedule, just like Virginia. They got Louisville this week, and they've got Syracuse. I think that's this week as well, and then next week Virginia Tech and UNC. So yeah, we'll see how this plays out for the Blue Devils. I thought I'd go quickly, Scott, over the NCAA tournament watch. I've been doing this the last couple of weeks as we're getting closer and closer and closer to Selection Sunday. I've got the 4 top teams as absolute locks: Virginia, Duke, UNC, Clemson. I've got them all as locks. I've kind of got them broken into 4 now. So the second level I've got is good but work to do. So I'll get your thoughts on this one, and I'll give the RPI numbers too, just as sort of my jumping off point. I've got good teams who are probably good but have work to do. Syracuse, RPI of 37. Miami, RPI of 38. Florida State, RPI of 41. Any objection to any of those teams?
Not really, but, Florida State and Miami are just not playing very good basketball right now. But I kind of agree with that. I think that's probably the way I would, if I were blocking them, that's how I would do it right now. I just think that Florida State and Miami are certainly not playing like you would want to be playing at, this stage of the season.
There's no question. Miami losing to Syracuse at home the other day. They lost twice at home last week, actually, with the loss to Virginia as well. So now, and this is sort of a nuance, but I've got the can't afford a hiccup area. These are teams that, again, I guess you could say good but work to do. But Louisville, who was second place in the ACC when they played in Charlottesville not that long ago, now 8-6, they're 5th place in the ACC, tied for 5th with Virginia Tech. I'm saying both these teams, even though they're actually ahead of Syracuse, Miami, and Florida State in the ACC standings, their RPIs are in that uncomfortable range. 49 for Louisville, 54 for Virginia Tech, and in fact, Joe Lunardi, the ESPN bracketologist, has Virginia Tech among his last 4 in. So, last 4 buys. So that means they're on the edge. Last 4 buys means you don't have to play in those Tuesday and Wednesday play-in games. So those 2 teams, and then I'll go ahead and say NC State as well. NC State, I've got teetering. I think NC State's got some work to do. They can't afford to have a bad couple of weeks here. Lunardi has all 10 of those teams from the ACC, including my locks, getting into the NCAA tournament. I think those last 3, I think Louisville, Virginia Tech, and NC State, they better finish strong. I'll put it at that. I think they got to finish strong.
Well, and you said it. You hit the nail on the head. Neither of them can afford hiccups. And they could easily have them. If you look at some of the schedule, Tech's got Louisville at home in Blacksburg. They got Duke in Blacksburg, but those are 2 games that could go either way. Tech also plays Clemson. So those are games that they're not sure wins by any means. I mean, even whether Bagley's plays or not, they beat Virginia Tech without Bagley just a week ago. So, Tech would probably, just picking on Tech a little bit, they'd probably like to have a couple of those games back that earlier in the season that they lost at home. That's critical about holding serve at home. And Tech lost to a couple of games. I think they're 5-4-3 in Castle or something like that. 4-3, I believe. And it's tough to lose 3 or 4 ACC home games and still have aspirations of being in that upper bracket of the conference for sure, as well as making the tournament.
Well, and what really hurts Virginia Tech, looking at the KenPom.com ratings, they're 34th overall on KenPom.com, so I'll say that ahead of time. But you look at non-conference strength of schedule. This is something you hear the Tournament Selection Committee use all the time when they break down who gets in and who gets out. Virginia Tech is 341. There are 351 Division I teams. Their non-conference strength of schedule ranks 341. So you look at Tech right now, and they're 8-6 in the ACC, like Scott mentioned. And you look at how they finish up here. You mentioned again, actually all 4 of their games are against NCAA tournament teams. You got Clemson at home, you got Louisville at home, you got Duke at home. You finish up at Miami. You go 2-2 in that stretch. You're 10-8 in the ACC. That's good. But if something happens and you play good basketball, but 3 of those 4 teams beat you, you're 9-9 in the ACC with the 341st toughest schedule, a non-conference schedule in the country. I think you may have to be playing Saturday night in Brooklyn. You might want to win that game too if you're Virginia Tech and if you don't finish strong here in these last couple weeks.
Yeah, and the Tech. That week out of conference schedule really comes back to haunt you when you lose some games that you shouldn't have, because all of a sudden when you start talking about being a bubble team, then that out of conference schedule really does have to factor in, which makes you wonder the strategy behind Tech scheduling this year, because it certainly was not a very formidable non-conference schedule.
Yeah, you'll see coaches. Some years they'll maybe dial back a little bit the non-conference schedule if they have a young team. You'll see them pick up a more nuanced, tough schedule when you have a veteran team coming back and Tech. There were a lot of people talking about Tech coming into the season, even though they lost a couple of guys from last year's team, that this Tech team was going to be deep and experienced and everything else. And then, to play that schedule, they did play Kentucky, but outside of Kentucky, you've got games against the Citadel, Houston Baptist, Morehead State, Radford, Maryland Eastern Shore, Presbyterian, a game that they had really struggled to win that game, North Carolina A&T. If Tech doesn't make the tournament this year, and I think they'll at least finish 2-2 down the stretch. If they win a game, if they win on Wednesday in the ACC tournament, I think that punches their ticket. I don't think they necessarily have to. If they win 2 more games, I think Tech gets in, skin of their teeth, but they get in. But if something happens and skin of their teeth, they're left out of the field, it's going to be the same thing that befell Seth Greenberg back in his day. He made only 1 tournament. I think that was 2007. There were at least 3 other years, maybe 4, that Virginia Tech fans had a case for, hey, we should have been in the field. But, Seth Greenberg admitted it as much last week when he was in Charlottesville for game day that, he got raked over the coals for having weak non-conference schedules. This would be another example of Virginia Tech scheduling a weak non-conference schedule coming back to bite them. So, that's why the work's cut out. Most teams at 8-6 in the ACC with a win over North Carolina would not have to worry this stage of the year. But Virginia Tech definitely has some work still to do.
Yeah, and the tough game, or the games that look like they would be very beneficial to improving your RP as far as the out-of-conference schedule. The game at Kentucky, that's kind of, Kentucky's not having a good season, so that's certainly not not like playing Kentucky if Kentucky were in the top 2 or 3 like a lot of people thought they were going to do. So even that kind of worked against them.
Indeed it did, yeah. You can't brag about, well, of course, in this case, a loss on the road at a school that itself is right now on the NCAA tournament bubble. A lot of people have, Kentucky still in the field, but teetering closer and closer and closer to the edge as they've been struggling of late. So yeah, work to do for Tech. Work to do for a few teams in the ACC, but you can go check out all of our little notes there. Every Monday, Scott and I, we trade emails. Scott actually sends his to me Sunday night. I put it all together Monday morning, and we call it the ACC Power Poll. So go to our website, and you can get some more of our thoughts on that. In fact, you can get each of our 1 through 15s. There's a little bit of deviation, but not much. In fact, I think there's a lot of agreement from Scott and I as far as that goes. Now, I'll mention that Wednesday night, we're going to be, of course, there courtside at the John Paul Jones Arena as the number 1 Cavs take on Georgia Tech. And we should touch on this quickly, Scott. These two teams have already met this season. Virginia won 64-48 in Atlanta. It was a game that was actually, for about a half or close to a half, it was actually a competitive game. Georgia Tech hung around. Ben Lammers I think he had 6 blocked shots in the first half. But this Georgia Tech team, since that game, has actually lost 9 out of 10 games. At that stage, they still look like a decently formidable team. But since then, the Yellow Jackets have really fallen apart. Virginia has, I think for me, just looking at this without having really done my game study quite yet, the one thing that Virginia's going to have to overcome is the 8-day layoff. That is something that can be an issue. It's great getting your rest in at this stage of a regular season, but there might be a little rust in that first half coming up on Wednesday night. So I think that's something that Virginia will have to guard against.
Ordinarily, I would agree with you 100%. But knowing what I know about, what I've read about, because I have this little thing I like to do when we're playing our next opponent is kind of troll on either their message boards or, in this case, the local media, in this case, the Atlanta Constitutional Journal. And from everything I have read, this team has quit. There's a whirlwind of controversy surrounding their coach, and for all from what I've been reading, he's probably going to be fired. Not just because they've had a lackluster season, but there's a lot of off-court issues there. Not going to go into them. I'm sure a lot of people know what's happening with him, and there's just not a lot of hustle. I mean, they got beat Saturday on their home floor, 76-56 by the Hokies. And if there is such a thing as saying they got beat by 20 points and it wasn't nearly that close, that's what happened. I think they were down by over 30 points in the second half. I just don't see much fight. And if we were playing anyone else, maybe even Wake or Pitt, I think there might be cause to be concerned maybe the first 4 minutes, 8 minutes of the game, shaking off the cobwebs. But I just don't think there's a lot of fight left in the Ramblin' Wreck.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, Josh Pastner, he came to Georgia Tech with baggage. There was speculation that if he hadn't taken the job, he was the coach at Memphis. If he hadn't taken the job at Georgia Tech, Memphis was just going to fire him because of baggage that he had even there. And so he comes to Georgia Tech. He's lawsuits are flying around between him and a couple of former friends, boosters. It's an ugly situation, and then on the court also, it's not been a good situation there, not a good fit in lots of ways. And you mentioned in your notes, Scott, I thought I'd get your thoughts on this real quick too, and I don't disagree with you at all. You said in your notes when you sent me your top 15 or your 1 through 15 this week, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and Pitt will all be looking for new head coaches in less than a month. Pitt with Kevin Stallings came from Vanderbilt. That on paper was a great hire when they got rid of Jamie Dixon, because that's what happened. They didn't lose Jamie Dixon. They pushed Jamie Dixon out the door, who's doing a great job down in the Big 12. But Kevin Stallings, what he brought from Vanderbilt, I mean, I'm thinking, hey, that's, if you're losing Jamie Dixon, Kevin Stallings, pretty good coach, has not worked out to say the least. And then Wake Forest and Danny Manning. I mean, Danny Manning, didn't have head coaching experience, but had a lot of top-level assistant experience. And, of course, great player, and you presumably could recruit based on his name alone. They had last year made the NCAA tournament field where they were in that first four, lost a game. But coming into this season, a lot of expectations, and they fizzled with a great recruiting class too. So, yeah, I'm not sure that you're not right about that. That all three of those could certainly be in the mix for a new coach come sometime mid-March.
Well, if there is one that manages to somehow or another hold on to his job, don't know his contract terms, don't know sort of weight, certainly not a school that can just go and afford to pay someone for 2 or 3 years to just go away, like maybe some other schools can, like some small private schools, that those funds maybe aren't readily available. So if there is a coach that might be able to hang on, it could be Manning, but with Stallworth and Pitt, they're looking right down the barrel of an 0-18 season. And I don't know how many coaches could survive that. And they have not really been that competitive in many of their games. And the situation surrounding the Georgia Tech coach, Pastor, someone, again, reading hometown papers, the heads that need to roll at Georgia Tech are the heads that hired him, because that was not a good hire. That was a very risky. He was not the knight in shining armor that rode into Atlanta to save that team. He had baggage at Memphis, and how someone didn't really do some fact finding there. I think he should be gone, and maybe find out exactly who made the decision to hire him, or a group of people maybe that got together on that. But I think that I'm almost certain that Stallworth and Pastor will be gone. Manning might hold on just because of the Fed. Don't know what his contract situation is, and maybe his weight can't just pay him to go away like I said. But I think there's a good possibility that you're going to get some at the bottom. There's going to be some coaching changes, probably a couple days after the ACC tournament ends.
Great points on all those. And let's wrap up talking about some baseball. College baseball has already started. Virginia won 2 out of 3 over the weekend. They lost their opener, but then came back and had a nice win over Rice on Sunday. Good competition down there as well. The opener was Central Florida, a perennial top 25 team. Rice is a perennial NCAA tournament team. They're a team always around the top 25. The NCBWA poll out today. That's one of the 5 national polls in baseball. I'm a member of the NCBWA, so I get that poll sent to me every week. And Virginia's 17th in that poll, so nice quiet start for Virginia baseball. Now tomorrow, home opener. Now, when you look at a schedule, a home opener and the opener for basically the new palace of Virginia baseball, the new Davenport Field, with the $18 million expansion that's still ongoing, but most of that work now that's going to be ongoing during the season is going to be sort of the hidden work, the clubhouse and that kind of stuff. As far as what you'll see when you go to the game either tomorrow or sometime in the next few weeks, the fan-friendly parts, the fan-centric parts of the project are largely done. So. But you put a game on a schedule to open up a new stadium, and of course college baseball starts early. It starts in February, so for months we've known February 20th is the date, and then it just so happens that it's going to be like 78 degrees tomorrow in Charlottesville. So Virginia actually moved the start of the game back. It was originally a 3:00 start, which makes sense. If it's February and it's going to be 30 degrees outside, let's get it over during sunlight so at least don't freeze everybody's tushes off when they're out there. But they moved it back to 5 o'clock because hey. It's going to be 78 degrees tomorrow, so more folks can come out. Plenty of opportunity to get out there in this new stadium. And, Scott, I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you are as well.
No, definitely. And I think that's a brilliant marketing decision by UVA to move that because you're exactly right. You start at 3 because you want, hopefully, if it's a typical college baseball game, it's going to be somewhere around 3 hours, maybe under. But if you start at 3, you're getting people out just as it gets dark and the temperatures really start to drop. But now with 70-degree weather, you can play past 6 o'clock. And by moving that start time later down, till 5 o'clock, now people don't have to worry about getting off from work. Now they can get off from work, go over, get a seat, enjoy the game, and still probably be out of Davenport by 8 o'clock. So, yeah, that was a brilliant marketing decision by the folks at UVA.
And I'll say this, during baseball season, I wear two hats. I'm a UVA guy, but I'm also a VMI guy. I'll be once again this year, third season, I'll be broadcasting ESPN3 broadcast of VMI baseball. We don't start our broadcast until late March, but I know a lot about this VMI baseball program. And I know that this weekend, for example, that they took 1 out of 3 down at South Carolina. They actually won the opener against number 19 South Carolina. So this is a VMI team that, me as someone who knows the program really well, I call a lot of their games during the spring. This is a team that the coaching staff, folks around the program, think can be an NCAA tournament team. They're one of the favorites in the Southern Conference this year. It's a good baseball conference. Western Carolina produces some guys who you make minor league and major league teams. There's Furman. There's the Citadel. There's a lot of good baseball in that conference, and VMI is expected to be a top contender for that championship. And so, there's the next 2 Tuesdays, tomorrow and then next Tuesday, a day that I looked ahead. Projected temperature next Tuesday, the 27th, only 60 degrees. So we'll still get a nice weather game there too. But 2 games with VMI here in the next couple of weeks against a good in-state foe from just down the road in Lexington. So I expect a good game tomorrow out of VMI.
No, and I don't follow VMI like you do, but I know VMI has one very well thought of pitcher. Did he pitch in the South Carolina series, or did they hold him back and he's pitching tomorrow?
No, he pitched Friday in the win. He did not get the win, but he pitched well in that game. He actually got taken out early. The bullpen did great. But, no, he will not be – it's one of those things. I was wishing this too. College coaches are creatures of habit like everybody else, I guess, in sports, the superstition. He's a Friday pitcher, in college baseball. You pitch your number one starter pitches Friday nights. It's not like in the major leagues. For fans who don't really follow college baseball, maybe until, if you're a UVA fan, you probably don't follow until the NCAA tournament, for a lot of fans anyway. It's not like in the big leagues where there's a 5-man rotation, so every 5th day a guy goes out there. In college baseball, guys tend to pitch. If you're the Friday guy, you pitch Friday. That's your number 1 starter. Your number 2 starter pitches Saturday. Your number 3 starter pitches Sunday. And then midweek games, you tend to give that starting job to – sometimes a team will have an established midweek starter. A lot of programs, though, will actually just use that either for rehab assignments. Like last year, UVA used that midweek assignment for Derek Casey as he was coming back from Tommy John surgery. Let him pitch – 2 innings, 1 start, 3 innings, another start, and kind of build his arm strength up on those midweek starts to the point where he was actually able to join the rotation on the weekends. He's a weekend starter now for UVA, but so some teams will do that. Some teams will have a 4th guy like UVA. I think it was a 2011 team. Will Roberts, who ends up being throws a perfect game for Virginia. He wasn't a weekend guy. He was actually the Wednesday guy, Tuesday and Wednesday guy. But I expect tomorrow. I've got to look at the starting pitchers for the 2 teams. I can't tell you their names right now, but the 2 teams are starting guys who will probably give you 2 or 3 innings. It's kind of like it's going to be Johnny Allstaff for both teams tomorrow. So that's kind of so. Really, the focus then is on the lineups. So in college baseball, you don't use your starting pitchers during the week, but your guys get at bats during the week. So 2 really good offenses. In Virginia and VMI, that'll be the showcase tomorrow in that opener.
And Chris, I do follow UVA baseball, but I also love college baseball, so I try to read as much as I can. And if you look at this opening weekend of play, a lot of teams played. Of course, your teams from traditional non-warm weather states like Virginia and on up north, they go south and they play. A lot of top teams didn't fare too well. LSU lost 2 or 3 to Notre Dame. LSU is a top, I think a top 10 team, maybe.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So the point is that a few years ago, you play those weekday games, and they're not conference games. Once conference season starts, you play your conference games on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So your midweek games, whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday, or just Tuesday or Wednesday, traditionally were against non-conference teams, and let's face it, mostly or mainly weaker teams. Well, you can't really say that now because there's so much balance in college baseball that on any given day, and BMI proved that, they went down to South Carolina, played a South Carolina team that is a top 25 team, and won 1 of 3. And from what I understand, should have won 2 of 3.
Should have won.
Notre Dame gave a game away against LSU. Should have swept LSU. So that philosophy of pitching who you pitch during the weekday now might have to start changing a little bit because you're not playing. We're not talking about playing the little sisters of the poor. You're playing teams that very likely will show up in the NCAA tournament come May.
Oh, yeah. The reason that won't change is just because of innings pitched. Guys are younger, and I think coaches still being creatures of habit, they're going to stay with what they got, but it does make you want to develop more talent. Like that 2011 Virginia team that had a guy like Will Roberts who was your midweek starter. You're going to want to develop. It's early in the year still. I mean, pitchers and catchers literally at the big league level just reporting in the last few days. So it's early for baseball. Now, these teams have been practicing for about a month now. The college teams have. But, yes, as you get through February into March, then into April, because you still play this a similar way. Now, ACC play won't start for Virginia until, I think, the second week of March. And I know for VMI it's a similar thing with them in the Southern Conference. So you really don't pick up your conference schedule till then, but you still play weekend games, you still play weekday games. But by the time you get into April and you're still playing, Tuesday and or Wednesday games in between your weekend series in your conference, you're right. You don't want to give those games away. So you want to have starting pitchers who are capable of giving you 4, 5, 6 innings in those games. Now, also the other factor there is, though, unless you've got a guy like a Will Roberts, I'll bring his example because he pitched that perfect game a few years ago for Virginia. If you've got a guy like him who you'll throw out there on Wednesday and he'll give you 7 or 8 or 9 innings, great. A lot of these schools, though, I know that VMI does this. Derek Tremblay will be there, a guy that we may see some innings out of tomorrow. He'll pitch 2 or 3 innings tomorrow for VMI, but he's also their long reliever on the weekend. So, your starter on Tuesday or Wednesday also relieves for you on the weekend. And so, we're trying to recruit fans out there listening. If you joined into this podcast, you wanted to hear some UVA and ACC basketball, you stayed around. I'm trying to recruit you into being a baseball fan because college baseball is a lot of fun. And for whatever reason, ESPN gives me a microphone 11 times a year to be able to talk about it on the air. But one thing I'll caution you about is unlike basketball, where, boy, if UVA basketball loses one game, Scott and I won't come out of our house for a week afterwards because we just don't want to see the world. We don't want to interact with anybody, anything else. College baseball, there's no shame in losing a game because there's 57 of them in a regular season, and even the best the best UVA teams of recent vintage will lose 15 or 20 games. That's just how hard it is in baseball to win consistently. As Scott said, there's so much parity in terms of talent that, you've got to go out there and play your best game every day, and even when you do, sometimes you still lose.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, and look back, UVA's national championship team, they lost 22 games,
I
think.
Yeah.
We said it by all, anyone that follows UVA knows that was not that was not Brian O'Connor's best team that he won the national championship with. So the parity in college baseball is you get hot at the right time. Going back, what we were talking to just a little bit ago about the parity in these midweek games, like Virginia taking on VMI. VMI very possibly will be an NCAA tournament team. I think what you meant, not putting words in your mouth, is that, and I agree that because of the parity, the coaches are are trying to build up that depth in starting pitching, because you're not going to see a Friday night pitcher that's a Friday starter, even if you're playing a very, very good team on Wednesday. He's not going to go out and pitch on Wednesday.
Right.
He's not going to pitch Friday, and then like we're used to in the major league, pitchers pitching on 5 days rest. When Friday next start would be Wednesday. That's not going to happen in college baseball. But I didn't mean to imply that could likely happen. But what you said, the necessity of having 5 quality starters, or at least 4, is going to become very critical as we move, on forward in college baseball, because the parity, there's so many good teams out there. There are Coastal Carolina won a national championship 2 seasons ago from the Big South, right?
That's right.
So if you haven't seen college baseball, and we're not, I guess we're just shamelessly plugging UVA or BMI, JME for that matter, it is a very, very fun sport to watch, and it is just, I think it's growing by leaps and bounds in popularity. If you don't believe that, just check out the ESPN 3 schedule now. I mean, there's just an abundance of games on there to watch.
Yeah, I'll plug myself. You mentioned VMI and JMU. That's my first broadcast of the year, March 28th. I think it's a Wednesday game, VMI and JMU. I also get to do a VMI Virginia Tech game in April, and then a few Southern Conference series. And I'll say this, too, a little overtone to tomorrow's game, the home opener for Virginia, in addition to opening the new stadium and everything else. The way the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee seeds the fields, Virginia right now, I mentioned 17th in the national rankings this week. 16 teams host regionals. Virginia just missed hosting a regional last year, but they've hosted regionals several years, dating back to about 2008 or so, maybe even 2000. I think the first year was 2006. So Virginia's always in a mix for hosting that first weekend in the NCAA tournament. Well, what often happens is, because the economics of baseball are the way they are, you often get bunched in with teams from a close drive by. They don't want to have, say, VMI, if they're a 4 seed somewhere, have to go fly their whole baseball team out to California to play. There's plenty of California teams can play out there. I say all that to say, if VMI is a potential NCAA tournament team, like a lot of folks around that program, including me, expect, tomorrow could be a preview of a Friday game sometime coming up. I guess that would be early June. If UVA's hosting a regional, VMI could very well be in that regional. And we've seen that before. Liberty has played in that Charlottesville regional in the past. I'm trying to think who else. Was there a George Mason team or George Washington team that was there in the past? So this VMI team, they could be getting used to the surroundings at a place they may be playing some important games in. That's just another little overtone, I think, to this game that, it's early, it's February, but 4 months from now, these two teams could be playing a very significant game. And I'll say this: Virginia won't be facing the Wednesday starter. They'll be facing Josh Winder, and that name may haunt us if we have to see him in June. That's the kid that's going to be a top 5 round draft pick, 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Somehow escaped Richmond without getting into UVA, and he's going to be a solid pitcher for VMI this year. And that a lot of fun stuff to look for tomorrow. In addition to just the fact that we get to open this brand new stadium up. I think I may have lost Scott, but we were wrapping up anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap. Oh,
Sorry.
Oh, there's Scott. There's Scott. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, just one final comment. I said that even though college baseball is, I alluded to the popularity, the growth of it, it's still, the postseason tournament is still kind of structured similar to the NCAA women's tournament. Is your opening rounds are usually played at a higher seed. Home for you still have the expense. The revenue is not there, so that you wouldn't want to send BMI out west. You want to kind of keep the group so you can keep those expenses down. And to me, it makes it even better because you're seeing local teams and have a chance to actually bring some of their own fans. And you're right; it's very likely that BMI could be back in Charlottesville again in May.
Yeah, so that's and for me, I kind of hope that. I mean, it'd be neat for I loved it when Liberty was there a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and that's the one thing I like about college baseball that I hope doesn't go away as it increases in popularity. I hope that the tournaments are still held on campus sites. Selfishly because Scott and I have been able to watch quite a few really good baseball games. Two games that Virginia won at least twice. That they beat teams 3 times. That actually on grounds where Davenport Field was the home of dog pile celebrations as Virginia won games to get in the College World Series. So that's a good part of the sport, I think.
Absolutely. This is a good time to be a sports fan. This is maybe one of the best times of the year. You got football, spring football coming up. Talk about that a little bit. We're just getting into baseball, and of course, we're getting into the most sought after time of college basketball, March Madness.
Yeah, you had to ruin it there talking about spring football. That's the only thing. Because
we're Virginia fans. Remember,
Virginia
always find the dark cloud on the horizon.
Yeah. When you talked about baseball, you talked about basketball. That's all good. I'm thinking, man, yeah, this is the best time of year. Oh yeah, spring football. Okay, but Scott and I, brings us back to that's right. We can't float in the clouds but so much. So tomorrow, UVA baseball. Wednesday night, Scott and I will be at the John Paul Jones Arena to see the #1 UVA basketball team on the floor against Georgia Tech. And so a lot of fun stuff UVA sports-wise coming up here the next few days. And I want to thank you for listening to our podcast. And so join us on our live blog, especially Wednesday night with the Georgia Tech basketball game. Until then, though, signing off for Scott German, I am Chris Graham. Wahoo-wah.